Did you know that the most powerful religious leader in the world once broke centuries of Vatican protocol just to say goodbye to a dog? Today I'm going to tell you the extraordinary story of how Pope Francis, the head of 1.3 billion Catholics worldwide, made his final wish to see his beloved companion one last time. A wish that moved millions around the world and revealed the deeply human heart beneath the papal robes. This is a story about love that transcends all boundaries, even those of the Vatican. Vatican City, a place of ancient traditions, rigid protocols and careful ceremony. For centuries the leaders of the Catholic Church have lived by strict rules that separate them from ordinary life. But Pope Francis has always been different. From the moment he stepped onto the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica in 2013, he signaled a new kind of papacy, one that embraced simplicity, humility, and a connection to all of God's creation. Born Jorge Mario Bergoglio in Buenos Aires, Argentina, Francis came from humble beginnings. The son of Italian immigrants, he worked as a nightclub bouncer and chemical technician before joining the Jesuit order. This background gave him a perspective unlike many of his predecessors. He understood ordinary life, ordinary struggles and ordinary love, including the special bond between humans and animals. Throughout his papacy, Francis has emphasized care for creation. In his 2015 encyclical Laudato Si, he wrote extensively about humanity's responsibility toward animals and the environment. Each organism as a creature of God is good and admirable in itself, he wrote. But few realized that this wasn't just theological theory for Francis, it was deeply personal. Our story truly begins on a rainy afternoon in 2019. The Pope was visiting a shelter for the homeless near the Vatican when he encountered a small trembling mutt cowering beneath a bench. The dog, later named Fede, meaning faith in Italian, had been abandoned and was severely malnourished. Witnesses say the Pope stopped his entire entourage, knelt down despite his bad knee, and gently coaxed the frightened animal out. What happened next broke all Vatican protocol. Against all tradition and the advice of his handlers, Francis arranged for Fede to be brought to his modest apartment in the Santa Marta guest house where he lives, refusing the grand papal apartments. "He needs healing," the Pope reportedly said, "and perhaps I do too." For 5 years, Fede became the Vatican's most unusual resident. Though never officially acknowledged in Vatican communications, the dog became well known among the Swiss guards and staff who would occasionally glimpse the Pope taking short walks with his companion in the early mornings or late evenings. Sister Magdalena, one of the Pope's household staff, later revealed, His Holiness would feed Fede himself. "Sometimes I would find him sitting on the floor just talking to the dog in Spanish. The dog understood him somehow. They had this connection that needed no words." Another staff member confided that during difficult meetings or after troubling world events, Francis would seek comfort in the quiet presence of his faithful companion. In late 2023, as Francis approached his 87th birthday, his health began to decline more seriously. The pontiff, who had continued working through pneumonia, surgery, and various ailments, now faced what many in the Vatican quietly feared might be his final chapter. By cruel coincidence, Fede's health was failing too. Veterinarians diagnosed the aging dog with advanced heart disease. As Francis underwent a series of treatments that confined him to hospital rooms and sterile medical facilities, Fede remained at the papal apartment under the care of Vatican staff. It was during a particularly difficult recovery from respiratory complications that Pope Francis made what his close associates called his heartbreaking last wish. Though physicians had strictly limited all visitors and activities, Francis asked repeatedly to see Fede one more time. "If these are to be my final days," he reportedly told Cardinal Pietro Parolin, "I wish to say goodbye to my friend." The request created an unprecedented dilemma for Vatican officials. Strict hygiene protocols prohibited animals in the medical facility. Centuries of Vatican tradition offered no guidance for bringing a pet to a pontiff's sickbed. Some conservative elements within the Church expressed concern about the dignity of the papal office. It was Cardinal Konrad Krajewski, the papal almoner known for his work with the homeless, who finally intervened. "The Holy Father has denied himself so many comforts," he reportedly argued in a closed-door meeting. "He asks for nothing personal. If seeing this creature that has shown him unconditional love brings him peace, how can we refuse?" On a quiet Sunday evening, after regular visiting hours, a small group of papal aides arranged for Fede to be brought to the hospital through a service entrance. Security cameras were temporarily disabled. Only a few trusted staff were informed. What happened in that room was later described by one of the Pope's nurses as the purest expression of love I've ever witnessed. When Fede was brought in, the dog, who had been lethargic and unresponsive for days, immediately perked up, recognizing his master despite the hospital equipment and the Pope's weakened state. The dog approached the bed slowly, recounted Sister Magdalena, who was present. His Holiness extended his hand, and Fede pressed his head against it. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Then the Holy Father began to speak softly in Spanish, private words between old friends. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. The visit lasted only 15 minutes, but those present say it transformed the Pope. His vital signs improved. His spirits lifted. According to his personal physician, who had reluctantly approved the visit, Francis slept peacefully that night for the first time in weeks. 3 days later, against all medical expectations, Pope Francis was able to return to the Vatican. Fede, however, passed peacefully in his sleep the very next morning. Some would call it coincidence, others, perhaps something more. When Francis made his first public appearance after his hospitalization, sharp-eyed observers noticed something different about his papal attire: a small paw print pin discreetly affixed to his cassock. The Vatican never officially commented on its significance, but those who knew the story understood. In the months that followed, Francis expanded the Church's outreach to animal welfare organizations. He authorized the creation of pet blessing stations near St. Peter's Square. During a memorable general audience, he departed from his prepared remarks to say, "The love of a creature who asks nothing in return, who simply delights in your presence. This is perhaps the purest reflection of God's love for us." The story of Pope Francis and Fede might have remained private if not for a Vatican gardener, who, moved by what he had witnessed, shared it with an Italian journalist. When the story broke, rather than deny it or minimize it, the Vatican took the unprecedented step of releasing a single, carefully selected photograph: Francis sitting simply on a bench, Fede at his feet, the Pope's hand gently resting on the dog's head. The image went viral, becoming one of the most shared pictures of the Pope ever released. It resonated across religious and cultural boundaries. Comments flooded in from around the world. "This made me reconsider my view of the Church. I've never felt connected to any religious leader until now. This is what true compassion looks like." Religious scholars have since noted the deeper significance of this moment. In breaking protocol to honor his bond with a simple creature, explains Professor Elena Vasquez of Georgetown University, Francis embodied his own teachings about mercy trumping rigid rules. He showed that compassion must be lived, not just preached. Perhaps most telling was the response from those often critical of the Church. Animal rights organizations praised the Pope's example. People who had felt alienated by religious institutions shared how the story touched them. A survey found that the incident significantly improved perceptions of the Catholic Church among younger generations. This story matters because it transcends religion, politics, and the divisions that so often separate us. At its heart, it's about something universal: the capacity for love, and the courage to honor it, even when tradition and protocol say otherwise. It reminds us that behind every title, every office, every robe or uniform, there beats a human heart capable of profound connection. The Pope's last wish to see his dog wasn't just about a man saying goodbye to his pet. It was about acknowledging that love in all its forms deserves respect. It was about recognizing that sometimes the most meaningful relationships in our lives are also the simplest. And it was about having the courage to be fully human, even when the world expects you to be something more or less than that. In the years since, Pope Francis has continued to challenge conventions and advocate for compassion toward all creation. The story of Fede is not included in official Vatican biographies, but it has become part of the living legacy of a pope, who taught by example that true holiness is found not in separation from the world, but in loving engagement with it. As I conclude this story, I want to leave you with a question: what would our world look like if we all had the courage to honor our deepest connections, even when they don't fit neatly into the roles society has assigned us? Pope Francis broke centuries of tradition not for theological revolution or political statement, but for a moment of authentic love. Perhaps that's the most radical act of all meals, to be purely, vulnerably human in a world that often rewards us for being anything but. Remember that the most powerful people aren't those who never feel, but those who feel deeply and act with compassion despite the cost. That's the true legacy of Pope Francis and his beloved Fede, not just a story about a man and his dog, but a reminder of what makes us truly human. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Until next time, reminding you that sometimes the greatest acts of leadership are also the simplest acts of love.